The Blue Piglet Pub. Above the glass door, framed by a beautiful portal of carved granite, the pub's name shone in neon. The Blue Piglet Pub. Why a blue piglet specifically, and not a pink one, remains unknown. Presumably, the owner found the name Pink Piglet too common, while something like the Purple Piglet Pub might have stirred up unwanted connotations and emotions. One way or another, the name glowed beautifully in the evening twilight, hospitable and captivating, beckoning passers-by to step inside. The barman behind the counter, who was also the owner, greeted every guest like an old friend, even if he was seeing many of them for the first time. But that didn't matter. What mattered was hospitality, warmth, and the creation of a cozy atmosphere from the very first glance. The pub's interior was typical. Appropriately dim, the wall behind the bar glittering with a profusion of bottles and mirrors, and quiet music playing from a radio. It didn't matter which frequency or channel the radio was tuned to, but the regulars, those who came every night, had dubbed it Blather Radio FM. There were about a dozen small round tables for two, and 5 stools lined the bar. 4 tables by the window were already occupied by the nightly regulars, petty officials who had finished their routine day at various state institutions. They had ordered their usual, a pint of beer, 120 grams of white vodka, and a sprat sandwich. This was their permanent menu, and the barman needed no reminding. The bar stools were empty, except for the one at the very end against the wall. There crouched a solitary old man, his back pressed against the masonry. Before him stood a square glass of clear vodka. Usually, remembering the old days, he would order 100 grams, and later another 100. He lived with his old lady on the 2nd floor above the pub in a 2-room apartment. The descendants of the building's former owners had tried to evict him, but he still had high-ranking acquaintances left over from the Communist Party days. He had managed to privatize the flat, which led the neighbors, who had overnight become forced tenants, to look at him with a squinted eye and point fingers. Old communist. The barman knew the old man's history well. During the Soviet-Russian occupation, he had been a lecturer for the Ideology and Propaganda Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Estonia. He could be seen and heard on television almost every night. The people had even given him a nickname, the Ayatollah. He used to deliver lectures on the international labor movement, the secret ploys of imperialists, the struggle of black Africans on the front lines of building communism, and other international issues and burning problems of the day. But now, after Estonia's re-independence, he had grown old and a bit demented. Now he sat on a bar stool, leaning his backside against the wall and muttering to himself, still discoursing on the current epoc's international questions and burning problems. The old man propped his head with his left hand while his right gripped the vodka glass. This posture, firmly clutching the glass, instilled in him a sense of security and restorative vitality. He held the glass in his palm like a microphone. Perhaps he truly believed it was a microphone. One cannot see into another's soul. He sat with a lowered head, staring into the vodka, muttering audibly so that his drone echoed back from the half-empty glass. The barman was used to it and didn't let the muttering bother him. The door opened and 2 guests entered, wearing black jackets and matching knit caps from a discount store. They looked like a middle-aged man and a woman of indeterminate age. The barman was about to wave a greeting, but his hand froze in midair. These were his old friends, the inspectors from an organization with a long name, the Copyright Protection Society. The inspectors took a seat at a table by the door, unzipping their jackets and spreading their laps like brooding hens on a nest. The barman rushed to the radio to turn it off, but then waved it off. Too late. A romantic song by one of Estonia's most famous artists was already playing. Normally, this wouldn't have been a problem, but the pub lacked the paid license issued by the Copyright Society for playing songs by Estonian authors in public. Worst of all, the barman knew from previous visits that the male inspector had alcohol-induced liver issues, so pouring him a cognac was pointless. And the woman always refused a slice of cake. She had diabetes. After sitting motionless for 5 or 10 minutes for the sake of appearances, the inspectors rose and stepped to the bar. "Well now," the man said instead of a greeting, "you already know us. But if you don't want to know us, you soon will." The woman added supportively, "We have warned you several times that you are not allowed to play music by Estonian authors on the radio in a public place without a license and without paying. You have not drawn the necessary conclusions." The man continued, "We are forced to apply stricter supervisory measures. For now, we will offer a voluntary, so-called self-improvement opportunity. If you, as an influencer, continue this unlawful activity and the songs continue, we will issue a warning or a precept. If things still don't improve and the singing continues, we will apply a non-compliance fine." During the entire time these repressive measures were being explained, an incredibly beautiful romantic song drifted from the radio. But the summer night that became ours forever, that summer night wasn't just made of poetic flight. Then it seemed to you that it was endless, but for me, our brightest moment was all too short. The barman clicked the radio off and the music cut out mid-measure. The inspectors cleared their throats with satisfaction. The initial repressive measure had already worked. They left without saying goodbye, having fulfilled their sacred duty. The nightly guests continued to arrive. The bar looked the same as always, a cozy, warm atmosphere, the chatter of people, laughter, and jokes. Just people in a bar in the evening after work. Suddenly, one of the guests, already a bit tipsy, shouted, "Hey, boss, turn on your blather radio FM. Without the radio, it's like being in a morgue." The barman was in a bind. What to do? Turn the radio on and face a fine? Leave it off and annoy the customers? But where the need is greatest, help is nearest. The barman found a small hi-fi microphone in a drawer and tucked it behind the old man's vodka glass. He clicked a switch. And lo and behold, a quiet, soothing voice emanated from the speakers. Blather Radio FM resumed its broadcast. The former lecturer of the Central Committee muttered steadily and professionally, inducing a calm, snug mood in the listeners. When the European working class had again gathered enough strength for a new onslaught against the ruling classes, the International Working Men's Association was born. However, this association, founded with the specific aim of uniting the entire militant proletariat of Europe and America, could not immediately proclaim the principles set forth in the manifesto of the Communist Party. Karl Marx, who wrote this program in such a way that it would satisfy all parties, had a firm belief in the intellectual capacities of the working class, which would inevitably lead to their liberation from capitalist oppression. Most importantly, the proletariat cannot liberate itself from the yoke of the exploiting and ruling class, the bourgeoisie, without simultaneously liberating all of society once and for all from all exploitation, oppression, class distinctions, and class struggle. Furthermore, it is especially important that— A shout came from the back of the pub. "Hey, boss! Enough of that Karl Marx! That's not a topic for our time. Turn it to another channel or frequency or whatever you've got there. Put on some sex." The barman briefly turned down the volume, stepped over to the old man and said, "Talk about sex, orgasms, whatever, but leave Karl Marx alone." The former lecturer didn't need to be told twice. In the old days, during the Soviet-Russian occupation, the first secretary of the Central Committee, Comrade Karl Vino, used to summon the lecturers to his office on the first workday of every month. Without offering them a seat, he would hand out the topics: international labor movement, Latin American freedom struggle, the Black African path to communism, and other urgent international problems that interested the workers, peasants, and intelligentsia of the Estonian SSR. Having received their themes, the lecturers would scatter across the Republic. They gave lectures in the laboratories of the Academy of Sciences, in university halls, in factories, at tractor stations, and in collective farm fields. But the especially esteemed lecturers, the so-called hardcore communists and their descendants, including our Ayatollah, were given a 1-hour evening window for political lectures on radio and television. And now, the old, slightly demented Ayatollah heard it as if Comrade Karl Vino himself had formulated a new theme for the collective. Talk about sex, orgasms, whatever. But leave Karl Marx alone. The lecturer on the stool took a healthy swig of vodka, squeezed the glass tighter, cleared his throat, and began. At the same time, the barman turned up the volume. In a certain capitalist country, the Minister of Defense raped his secretary right in his office, on the very desk where important state documents lay, even though both belonged to the Liberal Party. When the media found out, the minister called his secretary a lying cow. The whole thing ended miserably for the secretary. She was fired instantly, while the minister got another stripe for his epaulets. This is how things are done in countries of Western morality, where naked violence and injustice prevail, where normal human sex is not accessible to everyone. Not only that, the minister posted a video online showing how his secretary, now former secretary, masturbates during working hours at her desk using artificial penises. Instead of sympathizing with the woman and helping her as a man should, the Prime Minister said resolutely while watching the videos, "We must put the house in order. Our positions aren't strong as it is, and our ratings have dropped significantly." The lecturer paused, took a sip of vodka, and continued. Now, a bit from the world of sports. It has come to light that a coach for a women's baseball team in a southern state kissed his pupil on the lips and touched her inappropriately during a massage, after which they took a nap together. This incident might have been left alone, but the athlete's boyfriend happened to see it and raised a charge of harassment. The coach, however, rejected the accusations, claiming everything seen was done only with athletic performance in mind. This was also approved by the general public of the Western world. The next, especially disgusting case of harassment took place in "Boss!" someone shouted from the hall. "Give us a song for a bit. We've had enough of this sex stuff." "A song!" the barman commanded, and immediately a pleasant romantic tenor sounded from the Blather Radio FM channel. "Oh, do not fear, my darling. I shall not trouble you. Never shall I beg for your love." This was followed by "A Beautiful Maiden Walked in the Rose Garden," "The Boatman of Viljandi," and several other popular folk songs. During the concert, the Copyright Society characters re-entered. They stood by the door and noticed that the radio was actually an old man muttering into a glass. The male inspector turned to the woman. "It seems the influencer has made his conclusions. Everything is jock." "Yes," agreed the woman. "Everything is legally correct." The concert ended, and the barman commanded, "And now, the Daily News." Blather Radio FM began. A BMW was moving at a visibly high speed toward the city center. An accident squad followed the vehicle. Fortunately for other road users, the journey ended a few blocks later after a contest of strength against a house wall. The driver was detained, and a medical exam identified the use of narcotics without a doctor's prescription. Now, he will have to reflect on his actions for a long time in a detention facility, looking at the world through bars. The Traffic Supervision Center reminds you, make sure none of your friends get behind the wheel in a reckless mood. Blather Radio FM continued. An hour ago, a man with an axe was running through a stairwell on Partisan Street. He was ordered to put the axe down. The man refused, claiming that if he put it down, it would be stolen immediately. Finally, the man threw the axe out through the stairwell window. The residents were very frightened by his actions. Blather Radio FM would have happily read the news forever, but there was only an hour left until closing. The barman said tiredly, "Enough of this junk. Tell the guests something more pleasant, and then we'll call it a day. Give us something from the horoscopes." The lecturer drained his glass to the last drop and began. "Aries, Sex with an Aries is never boring or routine. Taurus, they will never leave their partner bored or neglected in bed. Gemini, if there is something they do well, it is foreplay. Everything else is hardly worth mentioning. Cancer, very sensitive and loves to cuddle, but usually doesn't get much further. Leo, extremely sexy and fears no one. Virgo, likes to talk in bed, but does so a bit too dispassionately. Libra, a peaceful person who falls asleep quickly. Scorpio, fears no intimacy and does it with passion. Sagittarius, honest in sex and doesn't beat around the bush. Capricorn, a faithful partner who doesn't look around. Aquarius, like a test pilot in bed, performing wild climbs and descents. Pisces, sex with a Pisces is like a flight into space. The radio took a breath and, seemingly moved by his own discourse on love, continued. Love is nothing more than a feeling received from nature, which becomes a virtue or a vice depending on the passions that soulfully inspire it. Love can be a source of both pride and submission, and egoism, or personal interest, does not exclude socially beneficial acts. Interest is a powerful stimulus that can lead to both virtue and vice. Egoism does not even exclude acts usually called self-sacrifice. A person can consciously perish fighting for certain ideals because they simply cannot do otherwise. It only seems like we sometimes sacrifice our happiness for the sake of others. In reality, we never sacrifice it. Sometimes love for women has inspired men to heroic deeds, but always starting from their own ego. Anything that can evoke aspiration can become a stimulus for virtuous acts. A man may prefer death to an unworthy life. What forces some people to mortify the flesh? It is the desire to reach paradise. And the fear of death is irrational. It has no rational justification. If what frightens us about death is the thought of non-existence, then we should also feel horror when thinking of the time before we were. Non-existence after death is no different from non-existence before birth. An entire eternity passed before we were born, but that does not bother us. Why should it bother us then to think that our existence will be followed by another eternity in which we are not? And the soul? The soul is connected to the body as a whole, and therefore it cannot be said that it resides in just one part. The body is a whole and, in a certain way, indivisible, for the organs are positioned and connected such that if one is removed, it harms the entire body. Furthermore, the soul naturally has no connection with spatial extension, dimensions, or other properties of matter that characterize the body. The soul is connected only to the entirety of the body's organs. This is obvious because it would be impossible to imagine half or a third of a soul, or a place in space where it would reside. The soul does not become smaller if a body part is removed, but the soul leaves the body if the connection between the organs is destroyed. And besides, monkeys, sheep, pigs, and also humans who are born and die are nothing more than the foam rising from a stream of water. The radio fell silent. The barman pulled the microphone closer and announced, "That concludes our broadcasts for today. Until next time." The broadcasts of Blather Radio FM continued for the joy of the patrons in the following days and weeks. It should be noted that the first 100 grams of vodka for the Ayatollah were now free at the owner's expense. A simple calculation showed that this expense was smaller than paying for songs to some copyright society. The choice of topics was wide, offering joy, knowledge, and entertainment for both men and women of every taste. The barman would name a topic. The radio would take a sip of vodka, clear his throat, and begin. One day the barman said laconically in Estonian, "Estonian language, my dear mother tongue." Immediately the muttering began. Yes, of course, the mother tongue is very important, and that is precisely why it is necessary to determine through mathematical models how many Estonians, Russians, Muslims, and Jews can study in one class, so that the level of their mother tongue does not suffer. Can a student speaking their mother tongue simply learn in that language without their parents being lectured and exhorted on how to linguistically organize their children's lives? Is it the task of politicians to make a simple thing complicated? Are there no other more pressing problems to rack one's brains over? The barman's stern voice forced a change of subject. Astronomy. The radio cleared its throat, and a lecture on scientific achievements in interstellar space began to flow. Using the Very Large Telescope, VLT, scientists discovered a quasar located about 13 billion light-years from Earth, which means that this quasar may be a representative of the very first generation of the universe's galaxies. Scientists have determined that the quasar is home to a black hole whose growth rate is one of the highest ever observed. The discoverers believe that the black hole grows so fast thanks to the gas and dust that the quasar ejects. Dust and gas swirl around the black hole and are then ejected away in the form of jets. Enough with the black hole, the barman said boredly and gave a new command. Sing a geographical song for a change. The old man sang, There where the Baltic waves lap, there where the winds and storms always roar. There is a white lighthouse, white as a swan. There is my home. There, my birthplace. When the song ended, the barman said with a yawn, Few guests right now. I'm going to the back room to eat lunch. The old man, demented as he was, misheard. He thought he had been ordered to give a lecture on food and nourishment in general. He immediately began. The question is one of food security and ensuring our self-sufficiency. Food security has been discussed at length, but our self-sufficiency in poultry remains below 50%, and we see domestic pork less often than we see our own ears. There is no point even talking about vegetables and other root crops. So far, no government has made an effort to ensure we can feed ourselves. The will to defend also depends on a full stomach. No matter how good the equipment and weapons of a soldier or a guardsman lying in a trench, they won't defend the state on an empty stomach. Food is the primary strategic weapon. The barman returned from the back room still smacking his lips and said, Go eat, 1 hour break. Then he turned the radio off. The owner of the Blue Piglet Pub couldn't complain about the lack of guests. The weekly income was quite substantial. The radio worked flawlessly every day. One afternoon, as the barman was polishing his cognac glasses with a towel as usual, he accidentally dropped a goblet on the floor and it shattered into pieces. Damn and blast, the barman cursed to himself. But the Ayatollah mistakenly thought he had been given a new topic. Such a prompt initially made him stutter. He rinsed his throat with a sip of vodka and began the lecture rather uncertainly. One symbol of transformation and rebirth is the fire of hell. According to legends, hell is located inside the earth, somewhat like a mine, except there is a large cauldron with hellfire beneath it. In this cauldron, sinners are boiled. Corrupt officials, state thieves, swindlers, bribe-takers, and other unconscious elements. According to the old devil's instructions, little devils keep adding wood under the pot. The sinners are boiled in this fiery cauldron for 777 years. By then, they are boiled clean and can ascend to heaven. The description of hell is quite similar in all sources. It looks like an oligarch's beautiful large fireplace hall with a blazing fire. But oh, that cauldron. That cauldron inspires fear. However, so that the smell of so-called aspic boiling doesn't reach the old devil's nose, the little devils also throw branches of rare and valuable cinnamon and oak trees into the pot, along with fragrant herbs. The motif of the old devil and hell is quite common in literature and even on the Eurovision stage. The old devil is quite a popular figure in theatrical plays. This archetypal character, who has the grand ability to boil lost people clean of sin, symbolizes not only the resilience of all sorts of corrupt people, swindlers, and thugs, but shows as a whole the capacity of a human being to become stronger, braver, and brighter. The barman had picked up the glass shards and washed his hands. Drying them, he said grumpily, since the goblet had cost €1.50 after all, "Let the old devil go to hell. Take up a new topic, and speak at length this time. I can't be bothered to constantly fuss with these topics and channels, and the hall is almost full. Speak on the origin of private property. That will interest all the guests, whoever they may be." Having said this, the barman poured the lecturer 100 grams on the house. The Ayatollah immediately downed half of it, settled his back more comfortably against the wall, and began a long lecture. Man descends from the predatory ape. Thus, man is part of nature. Human society is the organization of that part of nature. Human society operates according to the laws of nature, which make no exceptions for anyone or anything. As long as the predatory ape lived as an animal and destroyed its fellows based on the laws of the struggle for existence, where the stronger won and produced offspring, it was not in conflict with the laws of nature. The evolution of the predatory ape continued toward becoming human. Man, reaching a level where one could already speak of society, no longer followed the laws of nature. He used the right of the stronger not only for the purpose of preserving life and having offspring, but to increase his well-being through the consumption of surplus value. At the same time, it must be admitted that although one person is physically superior to another, in the end, it gives no significant advantage to anyone. Physical weakness can be compensated for by cunning, cheating, lying, bribe-giving and taking, connections, and the help of other such scoundrels, that is, through corrupt ties. Everyone is satisfied with their own mental capacity. There is no person who is not satisfied with their own wits. At the same time, a situation may arise where or more people desire the same thing that they cannot acquire at once, for example, a certain woman, and they thus become enemies. People constantly compete with each other for honor, career, and money, and from this arise envy and mutual hatred. Even if everything goes well for a person, they become restless just when they could enjoy life, because they want to show their wisdom and influence those who lead the state. Man, possessing the art of words and driven by his desires and passions, is capable of depicting good as evil and evil as good, thus misleading others. Out of our own stupidity, we value someone highly only because of positive public opinion, even if we ourselves understand nothing. Finally, everyone convinces themselves that they themselves deserve no less respect than all the celebrities hyped up by the media summa summarum. People boast of everything. Some brag about their dullness, calling it wisdom. Others about their beauty. Some are proud of their wealth, considering accidental benefits the merit of their own intellect and reason. It is said that a great figure is not such in the eyes of his wife or his lackey, but a great figure is also not the one created by the media. For can one admire a person of whom one must be enamored too often? Yet closeness and similarity to authority is a criterion of truth, and often a criterion of evil, because the poor also want to consume surplus value. The consumption of surplus value in the name of increasing well-being creates evil. Evil does not stem from the laws of nature, but, on the contrary, from the ignoring of nature's laws. In the name of increasing well-being, man constantly seeks opportunities to consume surplus value, choosing no means. With the increase in the consumption of surplus value comes an increase in evil, which becomes dangerous to all living nature, including humanity as a whole. The struggle for the increase of well-being is no longer the struggle for existence. Nature knows no development for the sake of well-being. Well-being means to own, to get something more, something that is not necessary to emerge as the winner in the struggle for existence and the continuation of the species. Well-being gives a sense of superiority, offers sensory satisfaction and pleasure in any form. The pursuit of well-being is the hallmark of human society separated from nature. It is a sign of egoism. It is the force ensuring the development of humanity while also being the source of contradictions. A contradiction arises between the normal pursuit of well-being inherent to man and the primeval urges of the predatory ape. The emotions of the predatory ape force a person to act without choosing means, as if survival and the continuation of the species depended on well-being, although well-being has nothing in common with them. Furthermore, it is worrying that the thinking brain, regulating the pursuit of well-being, increasingly loses out to the primeval predatory urge of the ape. In a troop of predatory apes, the healthier, stronger, more skillful one was the ruler, the leader. This is characteristic of the community of all animal species, including the human herd or herd society. And what is especially important? Eve did not offer Adam the apple because she wanted sex. No, Eve wanted to gain new knowledge and experiences. She wanted to know how Adam would behave if he tasted the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But God did not find their thirst for knowledge pleasing, and they were cast out of paradise. In fact, this casting out from paradise is also a matter of perspective. After all, we all live in different worlds. A cheerful person lives in a different world than a gloomy one. To one, the world seems more tolerable than to the other. God is inherently scholastic or leisurely, much like a government coalition. It is understandable that the government lives under the influence of the idol of the cave from Brussels, which most of all corrupts and litters the mind. But under what kind of idol of the cave does God live? We do not know. But we know how Brussels and the European Union were born, how the state was born. It all happened very simply. With the increase in human labor productivity, the amount of supplies necessary for life grew. In the human herd society, some surpluses of material values emerged. The leader of the herd, using the right of the stronger, had the opportunity to appropriate the surpluses and distribute them as he saw fit. A redistribution of material values based on force emerged. Later, the redistribution began to be based on money, which is an equivalent of force, not material values, as is mistakenly believed. Money became increasingly the equivalent of force on humanity's path of development. While the use of force took into account established customs and moral norms, money, which is completely replacing physical force, is also increasingly replacing ethical requirements, moral norms, and legal provisions. From money, or rather, with the help of money, we arrive, as if by ourselves, at purchasable sex. Under herd conditions, sexual intercourse was unregulated. Males, including the leader, did not know their children. Children were common to all males. Females did not know who the father of their children was, because children were made under the influence of passion in a dark cave. However, the view that passions take place in the heart cannot be taken seriously, for it is based only on the observation that, under the influence of passions, some excitement is felt in the heart. This excitement seems to reside in the heart only because of the nerve connecting it to the brain, similarly to how we feel pain in the leg because of the leg's nerves, and we perceive stars as being in the sky thanks to their light and our optic nerves. This means that for the soul to feel passions, it does not have to reside in the heart, just as one does not need to be in the sky to see the stars. But how did the state, the European Union, Brussels, come to be? Man reached the primeval age. The primitive communal system emerged. Over time, human self-awareness developed. Females, or women, could already know which specific male was the father of the children. The leader of the herd community, distributing the surpluses of material values based on established customs and his own emotions, preferred his own children and their mother. Thus, the emergence of the surpluses of values at the community leader's disposal, that is, private property, and the female's own awareness and the associated knowledge of the father of her children created the basis for the family. Since the identification of paternity took place according to the mother's word, the binding factor between the child's mother and the father was the mother's word. Therefore, social organization began to develop along the maternal line. A matriarchal society emerged. The head of the family was the mother. At the same time, however, the male's attention, though under the female's watchful eye, began to stop more and more often on a busty creature lying in the corner of the cave, who, with nostrils flared by the smell of meat roasting on the fire, excitedly watched the male's actions as he distributed the pieces of meat. From the corner of the cave, the lustful gaze of the world's first prostitute looked back.
Blather Radio FM took a brief pause, drained the glass, belched indecently into the microphone, and continued the scientific lecture.
The family began to regulate the redistribution, keeping, increasing, protecting, and inheriting of values. This redistribution and the associated rights and obligations were later regulated by the Family Act and the Succession Act when the state emerged. There is not a single word about love in these laws, and there cannot be, since, as seen from the above, the family was not born out of love. With the development of familial ties, where the basis for identifying paternity was no longer the mother's word but cohabitation, the role of head of the family passed, by the right of the stronger, to the male, who began to manage the use and consumption of material values in the family. The family with modern characteristics emerged: patriarchy. It should be noted here that the same conditions have also created the basis for the disappearance of the family as an institution. In a society where living conditions are organized such that surpluses of material values do not emerge, people do not rush to create families. The need for sexual intercourse does not necessitate the creation of a family. The satisfaction of said need is ensured on the basis of the unregulated relations of primeval herd life. Nature has made a woman such that, for a while, she is able to captivate a man's imagination to the point where he, without compulsion, takes upon himself the obligation to produce children and care for the children and the woman for the rest of his life. These are females. Ladies are the fruit of a man's imagination. The radio slammed a fist onto the counter, drained the empty glass again, set it down in disappointment, and continued at an even faster pace. Throughout the entire existence of the family, man has felt a need for herd relations in the sexual sphere. Hence, the contradiction between the family and the primeval herd instinct. Hence, the need to be free of the limitations of the family and to act in the conditions of a free herd. The question arises, why didn't families dissolve so stormily 100 or more years ago? What kept the family together? Faith? Love? Neither. With the development of social organization, a level had been reached where the existence of society and man was impossible without the family. The main part of humanity was engaged in farming and animal husbandry. One's feeding, the preservation and development of life organization, was ensured by the family and the division of labor within it. The man tilled the field or herded animals, while the woman tended the home, cared for the livestock, and raised the children. One could not do without the other. Being left alone would have meant a drop in the quality of life, an exit from the normal organization of society, lingering and doom. The division of labor ensured the preservation and development of the family. At present, wage labor and business do not need families. They need specialists. On the contrary, a woman's pregnancy, caring for children, and concern for their health and well-being are often obstacles to successful wage labor or business, thus, the family. We notice with concern the fading of the family as an institution.
But this process should not cause concern, as humanity has reached where it was meant to, the disappearance of the division of labor in the family. A person's quality of life no longer depends on it. What should cause concern is the catastrophic speed of this process in recent decades. Humanity is not yet ready for it. The family as an institution is vanishing. More and more children are born who cannot be called born into a family, the children of so-called single mothers. The mother still knows to name the father. Children are raised by grandmothers and grandfathers. Children are given to strangers to be raised. The state favors raising children in foster families. Society will begin raising children. Decades pass, and sexual relations have become so free they could be called herd relations. The mother no longer knows to name her child's father, and there is no need for it. The child is the fruit of society, as it was in the initial stage of human development. Development begins a new spiral. The result is the disappearance of the mother's role as the child's raiser. Next, the woman loses her primeval role as the one who gives birth. Offspring are obtained via scientific technical means, transplants, cloning. Let us return once more to the birth of the family. The family emerged. Stronger individuals, stronger families, gathered more and more material values and inherited them to their offspring. A need arose to keep and protect the gathered values, a need for an institution that would ensure the protection of family values. The state emerged, and then Christianity, or rather state religion. Napoleon Bonaparte said, "The New Testament was invented so that the poor would not kill the rich." Napoleon might even have been right, though in destroying states he failed fundamentally. At the end of the Napoleonic Wars, France was considerably smaller than at the start. 14 years of fighting had gone down the drain. Still, hundreds of thousands of people were slaughtered.
A coarse, drunken voice came from the hall. "Stop with the killing already, or you'll get one in the jaw. Talk about the corona. People are dying as it is." "Corona," the barman commanded, tuning the old man to the necessary wave. "Corona is a terrible disease," Blather Radio FM began with quite frightening words. "While there were always brawls on the streets and in taverns at night, now, during Corona, the conflict moved into apartments and apartment buildings. And what is especially important, since people spend more time at home, they hear more of their neighbors' voices through the walls. And this gets on people's nerves, causing scuffles with the neighbors. It is very important to follow the requirement to wear a mask in public spaces and stick to the 2+2 rule. Apartment parties are also a concern, because the 2+2 rule does not apply in an apartment. Of course, if a party gets out of hand, a warning for a breach of public order can be issued at most, and some may have their arms twisted behind their backs.
Corona caused the owner of the Blue Piglet Pub no concern. He had tables for two anyway, and the distance between them was roughly Ka meters. Well, he could take a few bar stools out. The barman agreed with the restrictions. Corona didn't bother him.
Suddenly, a shock shook the barman's whole body. Blather Radio FM announced the government's order. "Starting tomorrow, all restaurants, bars, and pubs will be closed for a month." Holy heaven! A month without guests meant a financial blow for the whole year. And would the old customers even come back? But a government decision is a command. The Blue Piglet Pub closed its doors and extinguished the neon sign above the entrance. The start of the new workday was beautiful and joyous for the owner barman. After the long standstill associated with the pandemic, he could open his pub again. Everything was as it was before. Nothing predicted a terrible tragedy. It was exactly 12 o'clock. The bright spring sun glinted in the pub's large windows and lit up the bar displays. For the occasion of the restrictions ending and the pub's reopening, the barman had dressed in classical bartender attire, a white dress shirt, black trousers, and shiny shoes,
with a black bow tie and a black leather vest. He considered a white imitation leather apron, but cast it aside. Too cheap, and he looked more solid without it. The door creaked, and the first guest stepped in, and lo and behold, it was his Blather Radio FM. It was clear he had successfully survived the era of the corona and was ready to resume his broadcasts. He took his usual place on the bar stool, leaned against the wall, and looked at the barman. Without a moment's delay, the bartender poured the usual 100-gram portion. In honor of the celebration, he made the glass shine a bit more. The old man downed a good swig, took his head between his hands, stared at the microphone, the vodka glass, and the broadcast began. The barman didn't bother with changing channels or frequencies. There were no other guests yet anyway. Let him blather whatever he wanted. He continued his chores happily, polishing the whiskey and cognac glasses with a towel, moistening them with his breath, polishing and inspecting them against the sunlight, humming as he worked. Do you remember the spring in bloom, on the meadow where the birds sang? Do you remember, as I accompanied you on the Ima Yogi in a boat? My heart beat for happiness. My breast yearned for love. Suddenly, a thud and a dull crash sounded from the radio, followed by silence. It sounded as if the radio had fallen off the bar counter. The barman looked around in alarm. Blather Radio FM had collapsed from the stool and lay motionless on the floor. The old Blather Radio FM, which for decades had reflected the burning events of world life, fell silent forever. But still he held firmly in his hand the microphone, the vodka glass. Thank you for listening. To discover more stories, follow the link in the description below.